Many veterans out there assume that high ratings from VA disability come from rare or extreme conditions or just simply don't apply to them because they weren't wounded in combat or on a bunch of deployments. But in reality, many of the most common VA claims can lead to high ratings when they're claimed, developed, and then rated correctly. In this video, I'm going to walk through some of the most common conditions that often result in higher ratings, or more importantly, what your options actually are if you have them. Also, if you listen to the end, I talk a little bit about how to think about implementing a strategy so that you can get that increased rating, which is pretty important for, anybody that's in this process. So the first one is musculoskeletal conditions, and a bunch of these are on, the most common list that the VA put out a couple of years ago. But I want to talk about them because a lot of the jobs that we had in the military, we may not have complained about some of the symptoms caused by these, or we may not have really realized that, we had these problems until we got out and, we went down 10 years down the road and we started to have those issues. So, the VA obviously has ratings for, back conditions, knee conditions, neck pain, and then, just different joint conditions. And I just want to take a minute to really just kind of talk about each one of these and kind of how it's rating and what rating you could expect. The first one is, the spine, right? The back. The VA, rates this one independently of the neck. So although the neck is part of your spine, you could get two different ratings for this. And, you're probably not going to get like a 70% rating on your back. It's possible. You're probably more likely to get a 10% rating, maybe a 20 or 30. But I think that the back can really increase your overall rating if you included it to some things that you already have and you were able to get it service connected. And I think a lot of people don't think to apply for compensation for their back or any musculoskeletal conditions because they didn't complain about it while they were in service. And that's a common thing that, that veterans face, and probably you as well listening to this video. The back is rated different ways. So, you could have, it could be by range of motion. It could also be by like incapacitating episodes, but it's there. And, if you have back conditions, and especially like if you were in an intense career field, like jumping out of airplanes or just putting a lot of wear and tear in your body, like I think it's reasonable to say that, whatever you're currently dealing with very well could have been created or at least aggravated by military service. And so if that's true, there's a couple ways to get that service connected. And this goes for all the conditions that are on here. Knees is another one. For those of us that were in career fields or MOSs where you did a lot of road marches or jumping out of airplanes, air assault, whatever it is, your knee's going to take a toll, your ankles, all those things. So these are really, these are really good conditions to consider if you're having those problems. Obviously, a neck condition is another one, and I mean, think about some of the potential. If you have some sort of diagnosis for your neck that you're dealing with, think about just some of the activities that you were involved in regularly while you were in the military that could be connected to this. And I'm not saying that you're a doctor. But if you have a condition that you're dealing with and, you talk to your doctor about that condition because you're being treated, and you ask your doctor like, hey, is it possible that, by me constantly wearing a Kevlar helmet, while deployed every single day, 18 hours a day, and not really getting the opportunity to really recover from that, like, what are the chances that caused it? And, let the doctor help you figure out what their opinion is on that, especially if you're dealing with something like this or, any of these conditions. And then, of course, joint conditions, these are things that could, and I don't want to say easily be connected, but could be reasonably connected, by having a conversation with a doctor and trying to figure out if their medical opinion supports you putting in a claim for that. Unless, of course, you have complaints of that in your military treatment records, then I really feel like you have a really good shot at getting this approved, and making sure that you are able to articulate what your symptoms are, or how bad it is impairment-wise, so that you get the right rating on this. The next one we're going to talk about is mental health conditions. And, this one is one that is, I think it's important because I see a lot of questions from veterans in different Facebook groups, Reddit, about, hey, like if I've been diagnosed with anxiety, and I'm connected, can I get, what if I also have depression? Can I do that? No, the answer is no. You can't pyramid. So any like mental health diagnosis that you have will be all grouped into one. And that's just so that we're not pyramiding. The VA disability is not designed to do that. It's, they consider all mental health conditions into one. So PTSD is not different than depression when it comes to compensation. So if you have one or more diagnoses from mental health conditions, they are all grouped into one, but all the symptoms that you have from all of it, count. And one good thing to know about mental health conditions that, maybe a lot of vets don't know about, and maybe a lot do. But if you're dealing with like chronic pain or some condition that is really bothering you and it's causing some issues, talking to a professional, you might find out that, you may have some sort of mental health diagnosis that could be claimed. And so, I think it's important. It does suck. It is a stigma. But, if you're dealing with something, you should talk to somebody and figure out if this is something that would help paint a better picture for your VA compensation. So, just keeping that in mind, like if you're, this can be a secondary condition to just a bunch of other current service-connected conditions that you might already have. But if you don't explore it, you won't know to collect it. Now, there is good news out there. I think it's good news. There's some new criteria for mental health, and I want to do a video on this eventually. But it's basically they created these different domains that they kind of rate you on. So it's these 5 different functional domains. And then they evaluate your level of impairment inside each one by basically giving you a score. Like this one, in this domain you have, it impacts you in this way. And with that score, they'll give you they'll determine your overall rating by like what your score is total for all the domains. So I think it might be a little bit easier to kind of figure out where you might fit if you're able to kind of match it up. I think sometimes the mental health one might be a little bit difficult to really figure out where you are, but I think that, it kind of gives you an idea of like where they are and how they rate it. So if you feel like you're there and you're dealing with this, check it out online. There's a bunch of information and it might help you kind of figure out where you are. The next one is sleep apnea, and this one's due to change soon, but I wanted to mention this one because if you have sleep apnea and you haven't been service connected for it, you might want to take a chance at it. It is probably one of the most difficult ones to get proved. I will tell you a story about someone in my family that is very old, and they have been out for a really long time, and they were never formally diagnosed with sleep apnea while they were in. But they do remember having the problems while they were in, and they do remember going to the doctor and reporting it, but just being misdiagnosed. And then, of course, they were treated for it years after service, and then they continued to be treated for it. And what that veteran was able to do was to connect the dots with just documenting it, like explaining, that he went to the doctor back in 70 or 80, maybe 90 something. And he couldn't find those medical records. So the VA basically had to take his word for it. But, I think he did a good job of articulating it to them. And then also he did a good job, from my understanding, articulating it to the CMP examiner. And he got it awarded to him for that. So, I know that this one's a tough one to do, but if you have it and you think you had it while you're in service, this one might be one that you might want to re-engage with a VSO and kind of get some ideas on whether or not they agree that you should take it or go for it. I briefly mentioned secondary conditions when I was talking about the mental health ones, but I'm going to talk about it in here because if you're looking for things to help you increase your overall VA compensation, secondary conditions has really got to be part of that strategy, especially if you just want a fair rating, right? But I will tell you, secondary conditions can be more complex, but well worth it. So, very important statement that I'm about to make is the VA is not going to connect, your stuff automatically. And, I wish they would, but, who has time for that? They're not going to. You kind of have to know. And it is a little bit more difficult because most of us are not trained medical professionals. I know I'm not, but we are masters at Google. And if you have a condition that you're currently dealing with and it's not service connected, directly to your service, maybe doing a little bit of Googling and asking the internet, like, hey, like, maybe looking at your current service connected conditions and figuring out if maybe the stuff you're dealing with now could be connected. And just some examples might be like, having sinusitis and now you have asthma, or maybe, chronic back pain and now you're constantly irritated, depressed, you have a lot of anxiety, you're having problems sleeping. Could that be, some sort of mental health problem? Another one might be, you got a service connected ankle and it makes you walk a little funny, messes up your gait just a bit. And now you have lower back problems or knee issues. Same thing, knee issues. Now you have back problems. There's a whole bunch out there, right? Like, I think, you just kind of got to figure out what you have or what you're connected for, what you have, and then figure out if there's even if it's even medically possible. And then if it is, you're going to need good evidence, just like with anything, but you're going to need different kind of evidence for something like this. You may need some sort of like well-articulated statement from your doctor, and not just, I believe that this veteran's condition is connected to this condition. They're going to want to explain it in your medical notes. They may want to write it into a nexus letter. You may want to get an independent medical opinion from a doctor that or a medical professional that does these on a regular basis, that knows how to write them. Those do cost money. But if you can talk to your own personal private or your personal doctor, they might be able to help you with this. Just make sure that you give them, like you got to explain to them like what the VA is looking for. And I do have some of that information on my website. It's, it's free for you, informedveteran.com. Kind of talk to you about how I've done this in the past and just some ideas that I have on it from experiences. Also, I created I think it's like 4 or 5 page list of potential secondary conditions that are connected to other ones. You can get the same type of thing off Google, but if you want my copy, just type secondary in the comment section. I'll send you a free list. And that might help kind of brainstorm some ideas that you may not be aware of. So something there to potentially help you out. So lastly, let's talk about strategy because, the VA process is difficult. And, I want every veteran that doesn't have, that isn't at least connected somehow, some way, and they should be. I want them to know about it and implementing a strategy if you're going to go through this process, I think is very important, especially if you're going to look for an increase. So if you're going to look for an increase, I would say start looking at your current connected conditions and figure out whether or not they're underrated. This was true for me on a lot of conditions that I had because I was like, I guess I got to prove service connection, and I would prove service connection, but I didn't take the time to be like, oh, I guess I got to have certain evidence to show my impact or how it impacts me. And so you got to make sure that you are right. Or, you could have had these things connected 10 years ago and now it's gotten worse. The VA will give you an increase for that condition, and you should have it. You shouldn't have to go through the stress of getting it, but that's how it works. So look at those current conditions that are underrated. And what you'll do is you'll take the rating that you're currently at. You can look at your decision letter and it'll tell you, like what you need to get to the next rating criteria. Or, you could just take where you're at, look at the 38 CFR, Google it, plus your condition, and it'll tell you like, this is what you need for a 10, this is what you need for, 30, 50, whatever. Figure out where you think you should be, and then, start developing the evidence to prove that to the VA. Another one is, and actually before I jump into this one, I do have like a Google Sheets like spreadsheet that helps track it, and it's kind of set up with this formula here. If you're interested, I'll leave a link in the description. This is a paid tool. I think I have it listed for like $5 or best offer or whatever. I got to figure out how to make it free. If you really need it for free, just email me at info@informedveteran.com and I'll make sure you get it. But it's a pretty cool little sheet that'll help you kind of track it and kind of create your own strategy. But anyways, that'll be in the link. The next one, so new conditions that developed over years but can be connected. So like these are like the musculoskeletal conditions, right? Like, you never got service connected for your knees, but now you're having really bad knees and you're only 45 years old and you jumped out of airplanes for 10 years. This is going out there and getting those new conditions taken care of and, gathering up the right evidence, writing personal statements, explaining about your job, and then pushing those things in so that you can get service connected. The next one is presumptive conditions. This is especially for the folks with the PACT Act, which was approved a few years ago and really opened up the door for a lot of veterans to get things connected. And there's just a whole host of conditions on there, ranging from rhinitis, sinusitis, I think asthma's on there, and also like a bunch of cancers. So check that out and make sure you're not missing something. You got to make sure you're on the burn pit registry. And then last but not least, but probably most complex, is secondary conditions. Secondary conditions, like I said, they're harder to get because you're going to have to connect one condition to another. You're going to have to talk to a doctor. You're going to have to get medical evidence to support it. But, that's definitely a way to move the needle forward. So I hope that you enjoyed this information. The goal here is to get the right rating for you. And I think the way that you're going to have to do it is by using these 4 different techniques and putting those into your strategy.